Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Type A, Type B podcast, where we talk about building your creative career at the intersection of productivity and creativity. So when you think about what it means to be a creative, a quote unquote creative, what do you think of primarily? To me, the first thing that comes to mind is individuality. What is creativity if not doing things differently than other people and doing things in a way that only you can see or think of? So I feel like creativity and individuality are kind of one and the same. So I want to hit on this idea of creativity from kind of all angles today, because I feel like in the age of social media and marketing and trying to promote yourself as someone with a creative business, individuality can really be at odds with scaling that business and with a lot of the marketing that goes along with it. If you're a creative, you have to be involved in social media to some extent, whether you're on TikTok or YouTube or Instagram or my personal favorite, Pinterest, which feels like more of a safe space. But whatever platform you're on, you have to deal with the trends there. You have to kind of curate yourself to the algorithm to actually get discovered on there. So I think a lot of times that can disincentivize individuality, and it makes it really hard to have a strong, unique voice and to still succeed on these social media platforms. I feel like there's so much brain rot that happens on social media, especially TikTok. You'll be scrolling through there, and I don't know, this can't just be me. I feel like this is everyone's For You page, that you just see the same things over and over and over again. And that's why you get those songs all stuck in your head. You see the same people doing the same trends, even the same comments, like verbatim. I will see people commenting the same exact comments on all of these different things. And it seems like individuality is at an all-time low if you're going off of what you're seeing on social media. So it's a tricky thing. If you're just creating for creation's sake, then you obviously don't have to worry about that. But if you're trying to get discovered and share your creative vision with more than just a select handful of people, you kind of have to play the game. So it's a weird, awkward balance of trying to be unique enough to stand out and to do something that feels authentic to you while still kind of appeasing these algorithms. And outside of social media, like the rest of the world, I feel like you still have to kind of play the game a little bit. So it's hard to navigate this as a creative person trying to build your creative career. So I want to talk about kind of like how you deal with this individuality and whether there's a cost or an opportunity to individuality, whether you can copy other people or not, or how to do it artfully, and then how to actually find your voice. So kind of moving all through different aspects of individuality. The main thing that I want to touch on first is whether it is possible to be successful while still being an individual and leaning into the things that are unique to you and your creative ideas. So first of all, like, it is possible, and it can be a huge asset if you are extremely unique, doing things that no one else is doing before. Even though it might take a little bit of luck and it might be more rare for those people to get recognition, at the end of the day, it's a risk that's worth it, because those are the people that will get that recognition, that will go down in history. So you think of someone like David Bowie, who like did a lot of cross-dressing, and he had all of these different things that were not common in the music industry. He really stood out as kind of like a vanguard of creativity, and he still got really, really big even though he was going against all norms. I also think of someone like Weird Al, who like, he is not a conventionally attractive guy. He makes really, really goofy music, and he'll even like flip things on their head by like making like a rap song and like making it about like there's like Gangster's Paradise to Amish Paradise. So there's all of these things that they're going against the norm, and they still get really, really popular. Because if you think about it, the people who are creating new genres, whether it's like the creation of hip hop or the creation of a new art medium, anything like that, the people who start those are going to have to be doing something different than other people. And they're the ones who generate popularity and generate interest, basically, for themselves. So even though it is a bit more of a risk, if you play it too safe, you're never going to be able to reach that level of success, because they stand out. They have a lot more of a legacy, any of these people who are kind of groundbreakers in the creative space, they have a lot more of a lasting legacy than the people who get really, really popular just by doing what everyone else is doing. So like the top 40 singers aren't necessarily going to be as legendary as these people who are doing their own thing. So it's not that individuality will cost you your success. I think if you're just thinking of it in the short term versus the long term, that's where the differentiation is. So if you really just want to make a lot of money off of your creativity, which not knocking anyone who like you're making money from your creativity, then it might make more sense for you to follow trends and like try to sprinkle in individuality here, where it's more like you're following certain trends but putting your own spin on it. I think that's a pretty good compromise if you want to, you know, make sure that you're able to get discovered. But for the people who really want to make a long-term difference with their career and with their creativity, I think that it's a necessary risk to take by putting more of your individuality into your work. One thing that I do want to caution, though, that I think a lot of people, and I'm thinking about the music industry specifically for this is where it seems most common, but it definitely exists in all forms of creativity, that someone might, when they're starting to build a little momentum or they're trying to start generating that momentum, that they might compromise their individuality at first. And they're like, okay, I'm just going to do, I don't know, these TikTok trends or something because this is what's really blowing up. So this is how I want to get discovered. And then once I get people to my page, then they can see all the things that I'm doing that are more unique. But it's kind of a dangerous trap that it's like if you get people's eyeballs on your page and you get them to follow you because of these certain trends that you're doing, if all of a sudden you switch up and it's like it's kind of a bait and switch that you're like, I brought you here under the pretense that you're going to get more content like this. Like, let's say it's like just like comedy videos or something, and that's how you get people to your page, but you actually want to be doing like serious filmmaking or something, or in the music industry too, if you like bring them over with like, I don't know, comedy songs, but you want to be a singer-songwriter, like that audience won't necessarily translate. So I think it's just something to be cautious about, thinking more in the long term is like, are more eyeballs at first going to be worth it? And will it be even possible to translate that into the things that you really want to do in the long term? Another thing I want to touch on is the difference between individuality and self-centeredness. So this is where we talk about creative careers. So if you are trying to build a creative career, you obviously have to think about the product, for lack of a better word, whether that's an actual physical product or if it's music that you're making or movies that you're creating, or I don't know, even if you produce events, all of that is some sort of a product. So if you are trying to make a career out of this, that has to be geared towards someone. You can be a complete individual by like leaning into all of these specific things that you are interested in that are really, really niche. And if you're just doing that for creativity's sake, cool, that works. But if it's so niche and so specific, you might have a hard time finding an audience for that. So I feel like that's where it's like, so you have to make sure you find something that is broad enough that other people feel seen and it's actually creating value for certain people, or it's addressing a need that a certain group of people have. I feel like that's one way to kind of temper your individuality, is doing something that feels authentic to you that will also connect with other people, because otherwise you're just kind of setting yourself up for failure if you're actually trying to scale this career and essentially make money off of it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that virality has to be the goal. I think that kind of seems like the standard that a lot of people set now, that it's like, oh, if you don't have 1 million followers or you're not making $10 million in sales every year, or whatever, if you don't have that scale of success, that you're not successful. But I think that works if you do have something that is not as individualistic and not as, if we're conflating individuality with creativity, then it's not necessarily that creative because you are aligning with things that already exist. So if you want to lean into the really, really like artistic creative space, your audience might be smaller, and that's okay. It's just finding the right audience to exist and the right audience to target. So it's like, yeah, you might be doing something that is kind of weird, it's kind of funky, maybe not many people are going to discover it, but if that aligns with the people that you are trying to connect with, then it doesn't matter if you're not checking those other boxes, because you're not even trying to check those other boxes. So let's say, for example, that you don't want to be someone who ever makes short form content. Like, you don't want to be making TikToks or reels or something, but you're like, oh, I feel like that's what gets people's attention. That's what I have to do. But if that is genuinely something that doesn't fit with the format of content that you're creating, then I think trying to focus on that is going to be a wash, because you're only going to connect with audiences that are not ultimately on the same wavelength as you in terms of what the best creativity looks like for what you're trying to do. You might have people that only want to watch long form videos, or they only want to look at photographs in a printed out book, or they only want to go to art galleries or something. I don't know if that's the perfect example there, because I feel like, TikTok can be like a marketing strategy, but I think you can scale that across a lot of different things, that if you're trying to do something just for the sake of doing it to get more eyeballs, like, it could be doing more harm than good. So I think this idea of reframing success is really, really important when it comes to maintaining your individuality. There are so many people I'll use YouTube as an example, because that's been like my main creativity well that I've been like pulling from a lot lately. I've been watching a lot of YouTube just to see what people are doing in the space. It's just really interesting to me. And there's so many people who have like 1 million, 2 million, 10 million subscribers, and everything does kind of look the same because they're playing the YouTube game. But it's not like, it doesn't seem, that's not where I go to for inspiration. Like, that's not what I'm inspired by. Some of it might be helpful, but I wouldn't necessarily say that they are the most creative creators on the platform. But I've been really into these like more micro influencers. The biggest one, who still, I feel like she deserves a lot more followers. She's still under 1 million followers. I think she's at like, or subscribers. I think she's at like 700,000. So it's still pretty high, but it's Life of Riza. And she makes these really, really beautiful cinematic videos that kind of go against the grain of what you expect from YouTube. That everyone has the videos that are like, hi guys, welcome back to my channel. And they have thumbnails that have all of these like flashy designs, and they have kind of like clickbait headlines or titles for the video. And she doesn't really do any of that. It all is just like, it feels almost like a movie. Things are a little bit slower paced, and everything just feels very, very authentic to her. That it's like, yeah, she might be sacrificing a little bit of visibility on YouTube, that people might not be able to find her videos, or people might not immediately be drawn in because there's these other flashy thumbnails that she's competing with. But if she did that, it would not feel like her. She just has a more relaxed, very, very cinematic vibe that I just think would be at odds with doing that. I think there's some people that it's like they can do all of those other things that are just the conventions of the platform while still maintaining their uniqueness. But for her, it feels like it would be too much of a contrast. And I love her for that. I love that she like kind of digs into what makes her her. There's a couple of other YouTubers that I've been watching. There's D Dames and Ron Doug too. They're both under like 50,000 subscribers, but just the most high quality content that feels, again, super, super cinematic. So maybe that's just like what I'm really into right now. But I think this is a perfect example that it's like, these people who have hardly any subscribers compared to the people who have 1 million, I have so much more respect when it comes to my actual, and not to say I don't respect the other ones, but when it comes to me looking for creative inspiration and for the people that I'm going to continue to go back to and that like I look up to as I want to continue creating content, like the other people just don't even compare. So when you look at it like that, like those numbers are kind of irrelevant, because I think these people are doing what feels a lot more authentic to them. And some of it is like filmmaking stuff. Some of it is really, really cool editing that like they're putting their focus into that and really honing their craft there and leaving some of the other conventions behind. And I think it's noticeable when people make that decision that it's like they could be doing something else, but they choose to go another way. And I just really respect that. And I think it's a really good reminder, if you're ever looking for inspiration, to not conform to things for the sake of conforming. Looking at people like this will help you kind of like get that pep back in your step to be like, this is what like it's all about. This is what I want to channel and like do something that just feels very me. And I think that in the long term too, when I think of people who are like, they're really, really big. Let's just use the YouTube example. Or I guess for music too, the people who are lean heavily into the trends just so they can boost their popularity, they usually end up like getting burnt out and changing, like just quitting YouTube or quitting music, or they totally change to a different style and eventually go to like what they want to do anyways, but then they struggle to keep that audience because what I said before, it's not what people are originally there for. I think there's so much more longevity in your career if you just do what feels authentic to you, because that's what you're passionate about. No one is passionate about, I'm not going to say no one. Some people might be. Very few people are passionate about doing TikTok trends and like just trying to like recycle these different trends that you see over and over again. Like that's not what is going to lift most people up if you're a creative person, because you want to express that individuality. So I think it's just more scalable in the long term to do you and like do what you need to do to like small moments of conformity to like get your audience if you need to. But like if you only lean into the, I guess for lack of a better word, marketing aspects of it, you're going to get burnt out so much easier. It's just exhausting to follow trends. Every time I'm like setting a goal that I'm like, I'm going to make 2 TikToks every single week, or I'm going to make 5 TikToks every single week. Whenever I do that, I can maintain it for a little bit of time. And then I get pissed off and I feel resentful about this platform that it's like, no one's forcing me to do this. I wanted to do this as an outlet. And now I feel like I have to like water it all down. And it makes me not want to do it at all until I reconnect with these sources of inspiration and realize like the reason I'm doing this is to express myself. So just to put a pin in this first like biggest section of this podcast is that it's about thinking in the short term versus the long term. So if there's one takeaway that I want you to take from like this first section, it's that you just have to make sure that your individuality can fill some sort of need for some audience out there. And if that audience is more than just a handful of people, then go for it. You're just going to have to be a little more creative, I guess, for lack of a better word, in finding that audience. But it is possible, and I think it's necessary if you want to think in the long term. So that being said, one thing that inevitably comes up when you're talking about individuality is copying people. There's a lot of copying that I think is necessary because no idea truly comes out of nowhere. Everything, there's like that Kamala Harris thing, like you think you just fell out of a coconut tree, like you live in the context of whatever. It's true, like everything is in the context of what comes before it. So there's copying as part of everything. Like there's no truly original thought, but it's just how do you take something as inspiration versus being inspired by it, and just finding that delineation between the two, I think can help you be more of an individual without trying to like invent the wheel every time. So there was a podcast that I was listening to called Bossy. It's with Katie from the Money with Katie show. And then her co-host too, Tara, I think is her name. And they were talking about this idea of stealing, which is actually what inspired this episode in the first place. And one really cool thing that Tara said is that her dad was a jazz player growing up. So she would go to a lot of these jazz concerts, and there was this thing she called the jazz nod, or I guess they might call it the jazz nod in jazz, that someone will play like a little riff or like a little section that they took from another song. And instead of like them being like, oh my gosh, they stole from me, they like nod in recognition and almost like respect. It's like they're paying homage to that certain song or artist that they're taking it from. So it's not that they are trying to steal it. It's that they are almost crediting their inspiration when they do that. So I think if we think of things more like that think of things more as a jazz nod. So it's not like you're stealing, and it's not you're trying to take credit for someone else's work, but you are just citing your sources essentially. Another thing to mention here too is that you should not just, if you look at one person who you're really, really inspired by, so let's say like those YouTubers that I mentioned earlier, if I were to go create YouTube videos that were exactly like that, that is just stealing. But if I take a combination between all three of those and then also some other creators here and there and other movies that I've seen and other music, if I blend that all together, it creates this really, really unique, like it becomes its own thing basically. That all of these little pieces together individually might look the same as like the places that I'm taking them from, but when you snap them all together, like Legos, you have all these pieces and they look different, but you could have 10 different people make something with those same pieces and they're going to look different. So if you're stealing from many people, and stealing I'm using lightly, I like, getting inspiration from other people, then you're still able to create something super, super unique because it's about the way that those things interact with each other. There's a book that I read called How to Steal Like an Artist. And this whole book is basically about this concept, like how to take things from your sources of inspiration and make them your own. So if you want to do any further reading on this, it's a super, super quick read. It's like a very visual kind of short book that I think this is a great place to start. And it's just it's highlighting the fact that stealing is your starting out point. Because I think most people who are involved in the creative process know that what you start out with when you're doing a brainstorm or you're doing a first draft or something, it might look completely different from what you end up with. So if you start with this inspiration or this theft, for lack of a better word, at the beginning of your process, it will likely evolve over time and there will still be traces of that in there, but you'll put your own spin on it if you don't lean too heavily into those sources of inspiration primarily. I think that stealing is a core part of my creative process. And by that, I mean, I'm constantly reading books and like taking notes when I see something cool. I'm always watching videos and watching movies and watching TV shows. I'm listening to music. I'm listening to podcasts. I'm going out to art galleries. All of this is just gathering information. And sometimes I'll see something and sometimes I'll notice something and I won't even necessarily fully register it that it's something I want to do, but it might just pop out of my memories when I'm trying to do something later. Other times I see something and I'm super, super inspired that I'm like, I want to make note of that because that's something I want to integrate as part of my creative practice. And I think that not doing this, trying to just be so individualistic, it's going to make it harder for you to create really, really great stuff. So this might be controversial to say because even though I do really, really love Kanye, like he's super creative and I've loved like his music for a while, but I think that over the last several years, I've become more and more disenchanted with him. And I think it's because him being so stubborn about being different. I think when they're so like pig-headed about like, I need to do something that no one else is doing. And it almost seems like their pursuit of ignoring all other influences or pretending like they're ignoring all other influences, like it just pushes it off to this sphere that feels very, very disconnected. And like, I'm not someone who likes something that is like just artistic for artistic's sake when there's no real heart to it. That's kind of what I feel like is happening with Kanye, that it's like when you have these roots in different inspiration, it does ground things a little more. And that's what makes people connect, that they might love this other thing and you have this small trace of it, that's what brings them in. I think that's what makes individuality so relatable, because if we're truly like, I feel like sometimes I'll be listening to Kanye's music and I'm like, I feel like I'm in his mind and not in a good way. Like this is something that I think only he would connect with. And there's a lot of people like that who are just like super, super artistic, like quote unquote artistic, that it's like, it just feels a little disconnected to me. So I think there's a lot of value in using this inspiration and stealing artfully from other people. All of that being said, how do you find your own style? How do you find your own voice and ensure that you keep individuality alive in your own work? There's no one good answer for this because every single person is different. And I also don't think that it's something that you decide at one point and then that is stagnant throughout the rest of your life. it'll probably ebb and flow. And there might be moments of your life where you feel like you're leaning into this and then you evolve and you're leaning over into this. But I think it's recognizing that it is a constant process, but like always doing that work to continue to move through that process is really, really important when it comes to having a distinct voice in your creativity. The one biggest piece of advice, other than using inspiration and pulling from multiple sources, is to experiment. You have to try things to know if it works for you. There are so many times where I think that I have like the perfect idea. I'm like, this is going to be my thing. Like, this is going to be my shtick. And then I try it and I realize that like it came out so awkward. It didn't feel right. It didn't feel good. It didn't feel me. It felt like I was like playing a part. And I think there's some amount of discomfort with trying something new, that it's like you have to keep trying it over and over again. But sometimes you just know in your gut that like, this isn't me, this isn't right. And you can only learn that by experimenting and not going fully in, like going all in on something at the very first moment. And I think a lot of people know this if you are a creative person. Like, it's this, like our last episode, we talked about iteration. It's just trying all these different things and not being attached to them. That gives you the chance to explore like what you're good at. You could discover that you are really, really good at something that you didn't know, or you might discover like just something that you didn't know about in general. Like, I didn't even realize that there was like this medium available. I didn't even realize that there was like this certain style that existed. And doing this experimentation is like the best way to work through all of these and basically like trial and error what these unique pieces of your creative process and your creative output is. And pulling from a diverse set of influences. So when I ran my interior design blog, I wrote this one blog post that I really like. It's still one of my favorite ones, that I talk about using music as inspiration for interior design. And even though these seem very, very disconnected, like music and interior design, yeah, they're both creative things, but they're not super closely or logically related. Things might manifest in ways that you might not necessarily expect. So let's talk about how this can work. Like, let's say that you are listening to a song as you're trying to work through this interior design process, and you get this rhythm that makes you think of a pattern that you want to put on the wall, or you feel an emotion that you feel like some colors, like you see some colors in your head, and that's what inspires the color scheme for the room. Or you see something that is kind of like chaotic and like feels a little bit like dissident, and you kind of like that. And then maybe if you're trying to like lean into, you're trying to decide whether to lean into the more minimalist or maximalist vibe for the room, maybe that inspiration, how it made you feel, makes you decide that maximalism is the best thing. So I think there's like all of these different ways that, like, when you're trying to get in the zone, putting on these different influences, but in your everyday life too. It's like, if you're trying to create movies, don't just watch movies for inspiration. Look at ads on the TV, look at art in an art museum, listen to different music, go out and like talk to people at the park or something. There's all these different ways that in creative and non-creative activities that you can find inspiration. And the only way to create this unique viewpoint that you're going to express in your creative work is to take into account all of these, because filmmakers who only watch films for inspiration, they are going to seem a lot more monotonous, and they're going to not feel like they have as distinct of an eye behind the camera, because that filmmaker who creates the most like beautiful, artistic, unique film, they might have gotten their inspiration from when they traveled somewhere and like, I don't know, saw a little kid's performance or something like that. You know, you never know where this inspiration is going to come from. And I think that's a critical piece of finding your own voice. And then constantly reflect as you are pulling in this information and you're experimenting and you are being very, very open to not committing to things, just iterating over and over again. Continuously reflect and do a gut check on like how this is making you feel. I think your gut tells you a lot more. In creativity, that's kind of all you have. Like, it's intuition and personal opinions, that there's not anything that can tell you yes or no, you're on the right direction. Sure, you could like get some traction from other people and get positive feedback, but the only way to really know that you're finding your right voice that's authentic to you is to trust your gut. And I think another thing that's important to mention here is that you want to balance consistency with innovation. I think when you're first starting out, like not having as much consistency is fine. If you don't have a distinct voice already, you're just trying to find something. And if you look at my videos on YouTube, I feel like they can be kind of all over the place because I still am kind of in the process of finding my creative voice when it comes to like that channel specifically. But once you have an audience and you have people who are watching you for your creative voice and for your individuality, I think that you have to find a way to balance that consistency with innovation. So you want to have a recognizable style, but you don't want that to hold you back from trying anything new at the same time. So I think when you're thinking of your personal style, don't make it so specific that it's like, my personal style is that I always do these kind of shots, or it's that I always use these drums in the background of my songs. Like, I think that your personal style is a little bit broader than that so that it allows you the room to ebb and flow and kind of like bend your creative vision a little bit without feeling like you're alienating the people who were there for your original creative voice. Because essentially that is all you have as a creative, is just like, what are you bringing that's unique to the world that no one else can have? It's the trickiest thing, I think, is finding a way to balance that and making sure that you have a strong voice without it feeling like it's the same thing all the time. Because that's another thing that we're not even going to get into that. There's people who do something really, really creative and you see it one time, you're like, that's amazing. But then they keep doing that same exact thing over and over again. So it's, just being flexible with yourself to see how you can scale that. I feel like scaling is always the word that we're talking on here, but scaling that creative voice across as many different mediums and ways and strategies that you can. So I hope everything that I said here made sense. I feel like this was a kind of a clusterfuck of a episode in my head, and I hope that everything came out clearly. But I mean, it's a difficult topic to talk about, I think. Like, creating your own kind of creative voice and carving out the individuality is just a really messy process to go through. So I think there's not really any clean way to talk about it. So just have fun, experiment, and don't be afraid to be yourself as long as there's some audience that can connect with you. So that's how I'll sum up everything here. So thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Type A, Type B podcast, and I will see you on the next episode. The other